So as you can see from the title, the 14 Pro Max is in the building. And man, I've only had the phone for maybe about a day, like maybe about a full 24 hours. And there's already a lot of things that I'm noticing, not so much different, but just the fact that I spent, about 3 or 4 months away from iOS. So to come back to iOS, there's some things that still bug the crap out of me. And there's some things that I do have an appreciation for. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is first impressions after 24 hours with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. All right, so first things first, I want to cover just the things that really stuck out to me as kind of being different. Now, keep in mind, some of these things aren't going to be, brand new things coming from the 13 series to the 14 series. Just things that I noticed I missed or things different, that type of situation. Being as I've been away from iOS, as one of my primary phones for about 4 months, maybe a little bit more at this point. So it's been quite some time. Let's go ahead and start with the physical, the design. Yes, camera bump is bigger this year. I'm always going to be in the camp though that as long as they continue to give us, bigger sensors, better cameras, better experiences with our cameras, I'm fine with bigger camera housings. I'm gonna put a case on my phone anyway, so I'm honestly just not that worried about it. The next thing I want to go ahead and cover is going to be the pill cutout, the dynamic island. Now, crazy, ridiculous name. Absolutely, I agree with y'all. But from a functionality standpoint, there's a lot of good here and a lot of potential. One of the running themes with Dynamic Island, at least so far since I've been using it, is that it feels very much like not a beta, like it definitely feels, ready for prime time, but it definitely feels like something that we're going to see Apple working on in the future. Like this is not the Dynamic Island's final form, its functionality and all of that. I think that there's still some things that are still missing. I'll talk about those before we get into the reasons why I love this particular feature. And I know some people are going to absolutely lose their mind when I talk about those. But anyway, so just the only negative I can really point out to is like lack of notification support. So when you're doing things like Face ID, I'm gonna go ahead and toggle the ringer. You can see, just certain things will actually cause the dynamic island to go ahead and animate or, do something, and you see it kind of shrink back down. When you're plugging in the phone to charge, stuff like that. And while those things are great, I love having those, like the AirPods connection and all of that stuff. It'll show the battery percentage up there too. Those things are dope, but I want all my notifications to come from here. So if I get a text message, I want that to pop up here instead of giving us that pop up that we get right now whenever we get messages, emails, all of that stuff. Pretty much anytime you're going to have some type of alert or, notification or whatever coming from your device, I feel like Dynamic Island needs to be what handles that, right? That's going to be my biggest thing just because it kind of makes the feature feel a little unfinished just because it's like maybe they didn't have enough time to work on the notification side or whatever the case may be. So that would be the one thing I can say right up front. I am not a fan of. Please, Apple, all notifications, put them in the dynamic island. I already love all the other feature sets and like when Face ID pops up and all the charging, indicator stuff. I love that stuff. Put notifications in there too. The next thing I'll have to say comes when you're watching full screen video. So I have the homie Brandon Butch. I was just checking out his iOS 16.1 video. I'll turn the volume down. Now, whenever you have full screen video, you notice the cutout here. It's a lot more noticeable what people are saying than the notch. Now, I will say from a full screen video perspective, I absolutely agree. Even when you pinch in, if your favorite content creator does say, I think it's eight, what is it, 19 by 8 or something like that in terms of their video size format, you can see the dynamic island actually cuts into the video. Now, when the video is just normal 16 by 9, this does not happen. You get the normal black bars and you're good. So, like I was saying before with the example and talking about the notch, in comparison to this. So, and I'm going to be told this is totally subjective. I'm going to say right up front, I personally like the dynamic island a lot better. I get it in full screen video like this. This is far more noticeable, than the notch was because the notch kind of fades away. But this just looks so much more modern to me. Like I said, when even when I'm not watching video and I'm gonna go back into the app I was in, which is my sports alerts app. But even when I'm here, like the dynamic island just looks so much more modern than the notch ever did, in my opinion. So for me, it's mostly an aesthetic thing and also the functionality that dynamic island brings. So I'm gonna go ahead and use one of my favorite features of Dynamic Island, and that's the Live Activities API. Now, anytime you're doing something, say like a sports event, like I have the basketball game, you guys know I'm a huge Chicago Bulls fan. We up by what, 5 points here in the third quarter, so definitely cheer those Bulls, or go ahead and cheer for those Bulls. But yeah, like I said, whenever you have something like a sports event or like your ticket for your for your airline or something like that, you have this option. It says here, start live activity. I'm gonna click that. Now, once I click that, you see it kind of as like a little quick refresh. And I'm just gonna swipe up and go home. Now, you already see the animation, but what you may not have noticed is at the top, it's keeping those scores there for me. So even as I'm going through my phone, I'm just sitting here going back and forth through my home screens, going in here. If I go into another app, like let's take it over to Spotify. If I take it over to Spotify, no matter where I'm at, I still have access to my scores and what's important to me. And I love that so much. You have so many app developers getting on ball with what Apple's doing with the dynamic island. And it's just one of those things that I appreciate about iOS as a whole. Like whenever Apple comes out with like a brand new feature, even like widgets, for example, it always seems like developers are way faster to like start implementing those new APIs and features on, iPhones and iOS than they are on Android devices. And it bugs me to no end. Now that's not an Android problem, that's an app developer problem. Some of it has to do with like fragmentation and things like that generally, but like I said, either way, my biggest thing is I love the fact that developers always seem to get right on top of your or right on top of their applications and implement cool features like that. Like that literally sold me on the dynamic island by itself. The Spotify the Spotify functionality, the Twitter Spaces functionality, those are dope. But this, for my sports scores, this literally just took dynamic island to a whole nother level for me. So really, really feeling that aspect of it. Can't think of too much else I wanted to talk about in terms of like dynamic island or the cameras. Let's go ahead and take it to the always on display, and we'll kind of cover this really quick. So what I'm going to say right up front is, from an efficiency standpoint, I do prefer Android's implementation. Generally, from battery testing, at least it seems like Apple hasn't optimized this fully just yet. It does seem like that implementation of always on display is a little bit better for your battery than, say, something like this. Now, I will say, from an aesthetic perspective, I love what Apple's doing with the always on display. It was something that when I first saw, I was like, I'm really not feeling that. And it could have been because of like their, wallpaper selection. I've noticed that in the past. Like if I see a certain wallpaper with like a new feature, sometimes it'll kind of turn me off a little bit. But then when I see what else is capable, I'm kind of like, yo, that's fire. And what really sold me is one of my favorite content creators. I can't remember exactly who it was. They showed their always on display with a picture of their family. I think it was Kevin the Tech Ninja. He had a picture with his always on display of his family. And when I, saw Always on Display, I was like, yo, that is really clean. Like aesthetically, this just looks so clean to me. Now, is this implementation for everybody? Absolutely not. Some people aren't going to like this. I do notice because a lot of people were concerned about what happens when you're in a dark room. So when you're in a dark room, it literally turns off the always on display. Like it literally, goes dimmer, the darker the room is. And then I want to say that it completely turns off. And if it doesn't, it does dim down to where it does not bother you at night. I had the device overnight. It didn't bother me at all. When it gets put in your pocket, obviously it turns off as well, save you some battery. One that I was curious about that nobody talked about is CarPlay. When you have it connected to CarPlay, the screen also turns off, which is super dope. I like that. Especially for somebody like me who uses wireless CarPlay, which is going to drain the battery a little bit more. I was super, super happy that for the always on display, it turns off the entire screen during CarPlay. So that was super dope. Like I said, from an implementation perspective, I think what Apple has here is definitely a very Apple-like approach. Like it's definitely different just for the sake of being different. But I do feel like this gives you a ton more information without even turning your screen on than anything that I've seen on, Android's implementation, right? Like you'll see here, I have a battery percentage, which this is fluid. It can actually change to say like my AirPod Maxes if I have those connected, or my Pixel Buds if I have those connected. So whatever Bluetooth devices I have paired, that's what battery will show up there. You see, I have the channel widget right there for the sub widget. It actually has my sub count there, front and center on my always on display. And then at the bottom, any live activity APIs that you have, they'll take advantage of this here too, right? Got your do not disturb at the bottom. So that also shows up on the always on display. And if I'm not mistaken, like these elements will shift around. So you'll never have a situation where you're like getting burned in or anything like that. Apple actually shifts around, the placement of like the icons and complications ever so slightly. You probably won't notice it, but just so that way you're not getting that screen retention and burn in. So, like I said, overall, I am really feeling the always on display. Again, from an efficiency standpoint, I prefer what Android's doing. From a like aesthetic perspective, like nice to look at, like eye pleasing, I definitely prefer what Apple has going on there. So those were the main calls I wanted to make in terms of design. Performance, I'm not going to talk about the processor or the chip. I don't care about any of that stuff. Benchmark doesn't matter to me. Just general fluidity though, like just going through the device. It feels pretty much exactly the same as say like my 13 Pro, my 13 Pro Max. So if anything, I would say it's like ever so slightly more zippy, and that might be because Apple's tuning the display to run higher than say 90 hertz more of the time. I always felt like my 13 Pro and my 13 Pro Max were at 90 hertz versus 120. It just never felt as smooth as my Android devices, but this feels a little bit more zippy. But for the most part, day to day, it's gonna feel like an iPhone. All your animations, all bit slow, because iOS's animations are definitely slower compared to the competition. They will always be absolute butter, and I can appreciate that. I'm somebody who would rather have a little bit slower but the more consistent fluidity than have something where like every time you click on something or invoke a gesture, you never quite know what you're gonna get. That's kind of where Samsung was at before. So definitely feeling that. Performance is top notch. I normally don't talk about battery in my 24 hours impressions. I like to give the device time to kind of settle in. But what I will say just for today, because it was actually really good, I took the phone off the charger at 8 a.m. So phone came off the charger. No, at like 7:30. Oh, 7:42. It actually tells you right there. So took the phone off the charger at 7:42 a.m. I still have no idea how to read these, messages and stuff like that. Like, because I know for a fact I was, using the phone a little bit longer than I or whatever. I don't know if you add these together for like total usage. I don't know how these battery charts and stuff work. Google's kind of, they kind of blew theirs up and now they're fixing it with the next feature drop. But Apple, I need a little bit more clarification on that. And it could totally be me, 110%. I will admit that. It could be me, user error, whatever you want to call it. So those are the battery stats. I'll kind of show you guys a little chart so that way you can stop the video and see my usage and all that. But I took the phone off the charger at 7:42 like you saw, and literally all day I've been ripping and running. So I got up, me and my mini me Ethan went and got a haircut. So we went and got cleaned up, got fresh to death, as you can see. So we went and got fresh, and then after that we had to go to the grocery store, pick up some stuff, came home, got everybody in the family ready, and we shot out to Disney. We were there. We got there maybe about, I would say like maybe 12:30, 1 o'clock. And I literally got home at maybe like 9 o'clock. So that kind of gives you an idea. I've been out literally all day using the phone to take photos, take videos, obviously, if I'm going out there. Also, keep in mind too, when I'm in my car, I'm using wireless CarPlay, which drains your battery, a little bit faster than it would not a little bit. It drains your battery faster than what it would if you were just chilling in standby. And as you can see, I still got 7% left. So 7% is still sitting there in the tank. So I could say I 100% could go maybe another 30 or 40 minutes with that 7%. So definitely good battery life for sure. I don't know if, oh, kind of had a hiccup there. I don't know if Apple has that whole battery learning your usage stuff that Android has, but I'll definitely keep you guys posted on the battery itself and how that's kind of shaping out. Last thing I'll kind of touch on before we go ahead and end this one are going to be the camera. So I already talked about the design of the cameras. Now I want to talk about the camera performance. So I haven't gotten a chance to test the 14 Pro Max versus the 13 Pro Max in daylight. From everything I saw, they looked pretty similar. Where I saw the biggest change in other creators' videos and my own usage so far is in low light. In low light, I am definitely noticing a difference. I know that iPhones still tend to kind of flare, like, like street lamps and stuff like that. For some reason, my 14 Pro Max was doing a way better job controlling those flares than my 13 Pro Max does. I'm obviously going to be, flashing some camera and video samples for you all to see, and I'll make sure that I include those too. But low light performance definitely seems to be improved on all the cameras actually. Ultra wide seems to be a little bit better, not by a whole lot, but definitely a little bit better. Telephoto, I took a photo of like a sign or something, and you can see the difference between the 3x on the 14 Pro Max and the 3x on the 13 Pro Max, which that tells you because they literally did not change it. They kept the 3x the same. The processing just got a little bit better with that. Also, in terms of processing, yes, you still have crushed blacks. I'm noticing that myself. That's something that while I definitely don't like, I don't prefer that when it comes to processing. I can live with that. What I can't live with is HDR issues. And y'all know iPhones of the past, HDR was a heavy topic whenever you talked about the iPhone's camera set. Now, I don't know if it's 16.1, right? And I'm going to preface this by saying creators, who have done content before, iOS 16.1 came out. I have seen photo samples with blown out highlights and all of that from the iPhone. I think even The Verge was talking about blown out highlights on the iPhone. And what I will say is I tried to get the camera, and you'll see some of the angles that I'm shooting at in some of these samples. I tried to put the iPhone in situations where I know my 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max would have completely blown out highlights. And it didn't. It didn't. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that the camera doesn't have an HDR issue, that it's fixed because of 16.1. I'm not saying any of that. I've only had the phone for 20, for just over 24 hours. So I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying though is that I'm not experiencing those issues, and me not experiencing that is making me a very happy camper when it comes to this 14 Pro Max. So on the camera side, that's where I'll kind of leave that for now. Nothing too definitive. Switching gears and talking video. So far with video, I haven't noticed too big of a difference. But again, it's just, over 24 hours. So plenty of time to still test this out versus the 13 Pro Max when it comes to video. But like I said, I honestly didn't notice. iPhone video has been really good in most conditions for a very long time at this point. So in my opinion, it's just getting harder and harder to see these like major changes and major improvements. So like I said, in terms of video, it seems to be just as good. I haven't checked out like the new action mode yet. I haven't checked out the 4K cinematic mode, or yeah, I think it's 4K. Yeah, 4K cinematic mode. I haven't tried out, either of those two. I'll definitely make sure I try to get some of that stuff in the full review. So like I said, just the first impressions, 24 hours in. I'm still in the honeymoon phase very much with the 14 Pro Max, but I will say I am definitely having a great time with this device. Now, there are still those things that literally grind my gears when it comes to not just this iPhone, but just iOS and Apple's decisions as a whole. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna talk about those in my live stream, which is the Ike's Tech Talk weekly live stream. If you don't, if you've never heard of it, come check us out. I always have a live stream Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time. What I'm gonna do is talk about those little things in iOS that I really want Apple to update and change in iOS 17. And also I'll talk about the good things that I missed, and when I got back, I was like, wow, I forgot that I could do that with my iPhone, right? Things like being able to control your media output source without even having to have anything playing. On Android, unless you're doing like YouTube or a music streaming app, trying to change your media source is an absolute nightmare on Android, at least in my opinion. I'm not a fan. On iOS, it is very simple, very easy. You cannot have any media playing and it will still let you switch between sources. Even in CarPlay, which Android Auto, you are stuck in Android Auto. It's stuck coming out of your speakers. So, like I said, I don't want to talk about that too much. I want to save that for Thursday. So definitely come through, chill, have a good time. It's always fun. But that's what we're going to wrap up this one. This is, like I said, the first impressions of the 14 Pro Max. Definitely enjoying myself. I will keep you all up to date. But as always, this is Ike's Tech Talk. I will catch you all in the next video. Peace.